Tyrel Sulzer, Bob Boniface, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thanks for having us, Will.
Thanks, Will.
The two of you partnered to do a traditional search fund and acquired TransTech, which is a CDL school. So people wanting to become truck drivers, school bus drivers, other operators of large vehicles need to get their license. And you, TransTech, you all are a school that trains them. So we're going to touch on a lot of themes today: trucking, trade schools, partnering to do a search, and a lot more. Let's start, though, with some background on each of you. Tyrel, will you go first, please?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for having me, Will. I'm a Canadian, so I was born and raised in British Columbia. We do wood, mining and oil up there. So I ended up going into engineering school at University of British Columbia. Worked for an ExxonMobil subsidiary called Imperial Oil up there. And I worked kind of fly in, fly out of northern Canada, living in camp and working with mining crews to build large mining infrastructure for the oil sands. After that, I went to business school, spent 2 years there. I looked into doing the investment banking thing. I had a friend who went to Goldman ahead of me, tried that out and turned 180 degrees and went right back. And as I was trying to figure out what to do next, I interned with a searcher who acquired a traffic control business in Atlanta. And I caught the search bug. And so from there, we'll get into it later, but met up with Bob and decided to run a traditional search.
Great. And why did you run from investment banking? What didn't you like about it?
I felt like I kind of missed the mark in my lifetime to do that, kind of lifestyle. I had a fiance. We were planning to have a family soon. And the late nights, got to me. Coming from the mining world, it frustrated me that I had to be up at 9 and then up till 2 a.m., 3 a.m., doing the banking stuff. I was like, just put me on night shift. I can do this if I can just get some sleep. But great learning experience. Like, loved the people that were there. I think it was the right firm. It just wasn't right for me in my late 20s.
Gotcha. So naturally, you chose the much easier path of getting into small business. Bob, your turn.
Yeah. So I'm from Detroit originally. Come from an automotive family. My dad's a car designer at General Motors. Kind of grew up loving cars and seeing myself working in the industry. After college, I went to end up working at General Motors, where I worked in manufacturing finance, helping to kind of design and run the budgets for the North America manufacturing operations at GM, which is great. It kind of got that exposure to operations and how to set up a plant and make it more efficient and work with hands-on with the product, which I thought was really cool as a car nut and as someone who likes to see kind of something tangible to work on. I went to business school with the goal of eventually going back into the auto industry, possibly at General Motors. But pretty early on, I kind of discovered this search fund path. And as someone who always kind of had this entrepreneurial itch in the back of my mind, but never really had the great idea that I would say, hey, this is worth, foregoing a couple of years of income and possibly, going for broke here. I thought it'd be really interesting to pursue something like a search fund, given kind of the one shot coming out of business school. At business school, I spent the summer interning for a family friend's automotive supplier. So it was a automotive forging company, stamping steel parts in a hot, dirty, sweaty warehouse. And I fell in love with it. I saw that the same skills that I kind of learned at GM were easily applicable to small businesses, and the same challenges that big companies were solving and that I felt like I liked working on there, you can work on in a small business, except the difference is that the rewards of that end up going in a greater share to your pocket versus, some big company that you're working for. So that was kind of what kicked me off on this path.
Well, I also recall from our pre-call, I think, Bob, you saying that a lot of the kind of corporate best practices can be applied into small businesses, and you can get a lot of wins there just by kind of bringing that corporate knowledge down a little bit. Great, guys. And so you meet at business school, and you kind of have both kind of figured out that search is something for you. How do you meet? How do you decide that this is a project you want to take on together?
Yeah, so Bob and I met in the kind of early days of business school, but never really, our friend groups overlap, but didn't really talk that much. And there's a class on search when you kind of discover becoming kind of search curious or thinking about that world of search. And so as we were trying to figure that out, we were exchanging notes on investors, kind of who we talked to, other searchers, kind of how it would look. And And so I think kind of during that timeline, both listening to each other in class and then swapping notes on actually going for it, we, kind of ended up converging in a partnership model afterwards.
That is a big decision. Partnering in any kind of multi-year life project is a big decision. But oftentimes the two people already know each other. So you guys kind of decided to partner before knowing each other very well. Talk to me about how that looked and how you did that in a way that you felt like you were sufficiently diligencing each other.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because we kind of approached it from this point of saying, okay, regardless of whether we partner or not, we're both going down this search fund route. So, I think it gave us a little bit of optionality up front to say, if this doesn't work out, the worst, at least in the early stages, we're just trading notes. We're talking about who have you talked to in the investor community, what kind of businesses would you like, and it would just help kind of strengthen our knowledge about search funds. But I think once we decided to formally start, investigating this thing, we kind of approached it from two different angles. One was kind of the academic angle, which I think I'll let Tyrel talk about a little bit more because he kind of designed that process. But I think a lot of it was just learning kind of what are deal breakers for you. What kind of business are you looking to acquire from like a very tactical standpoint? Like, would you be comfortable running a software business that's sold into the blue collar space? We kind of both knew that we wanted to do blue collar, but that means a lot of different things to two different guys. Like if Tyrel wants to do an oil and gas business, coming from his background there, but I want to do automotive, if the business is in selling oil and gas supply stuff in Lubbock, Texas, it's going to be much easier sell for Tyrel than for me, who's going to learn a new industry and move to a new spot. So I think getting into, okay, what are the universe of businesses that we like to acquire, but also doing some just casual social engagements. So, going out to dinner, meeting Tyrel's then fiance, now wife, Julia. We also took a ski trip. So these are things that maybe seem kind of maybe silly and small, but I think it was really important to understand. Okay, what's Tyrel's sense of humor like? How does he kind of view small business? Is this like a get rich quick scheme to him? Because I having done a little bit of homework at that point, I know that this is a hard path. This is something that takes a long time. Like you said, well, it's a multi-year commitment. And so you don't want to sign up with someone who views this as like a bang, we're just going to be successful day one. And, this is going to be a long grind. And I think it was useful that and helpful that we had kind of had that relationship where we knew that we could hang out socially, be serious together, work on kind of challenging problems. We also did a couple school projects together that would help and kind of test that relationship in a small way. But knowing that looking back now as having acquired, we've moved twice together in a year and a half. I've lived with him and his wife for 4 months when we first bought the business. So these are things I don't think you could do unless you have at that base level like a really good, enjoying hanging out with this person. Yeah.
Well, of course, Bob, everything you just described, there's a word for that: dating. And I know the joke, it tells itself, and that you guys have jokingly referred to it that way as well. But the process is similar. I mean, it's undeniable. It's unavoidable to come to that conclusion. And then, why did you guys independently, just the concept of having a partner? Because some people don't even consider having a partner. So aside from you choosing each other, being open to the very concept of it, what did you see as the benefits of not going down this path alone?
Yeah, I think, in school we had heard from a number of searchers. I think the part that's hardest is, when the deal breaks, when the company's not making money and you're by yourself, there's this intense sense of loneliness. And that kind of came out all the time as being the hardest part. And then when you listen to the partner searchers, they were able to kind of articulate that they were able to get through that kind of low point. So I think there's a bit of emotional risk mitigation in going for a partnership. And then similarly, some of the best outcomes we had heard of were actually, partnered searches. Part of that, I think, is, we hear all the time, like working in the business versus on the business. And I think when there's two people, you're able to divvy up some of the in the business tasks and get to that onto the business faster. So I felt like it was 1 + 1 = 3 a little bit with the search. So it wasn't mandatory for me to go do it, but it was certainly worth considering, from an emotional standpoint and a financial return standpoint.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Bob?
Yeah, I think I echo everything Tyrel said, but I think also just from an academic standpoint, you look at some of the data that were seeing, and it was clear that partnered searches acquire more often. They typically have a better result in terms of money over invested capital from a return standpoint. And I think it would just be a lot more fun. I thought going into this, the idea of searching for a business for up to 2 years by yourself, with no one to talk to other than maybe your parents and your investors, sounded like a pretty lonely path. I think doing the math on, okay, if we split the returns, I can still feel very comfortable with the return that we could get here. I just thought everything kind of pointed towards a partnership. I also, knowing that, having just seen other entrepreneurial ventures not outside of the search world, kind of in case business school, the people that have gone by themselves, like Tyrel said, when things don't go right, it is just an intense period of kind of loneliness and kind of mourning the lost deal or something like that. And I think having someone to, hey, let's go get a beer or something like that when a deal breaks would be a lot more satisfaction than riding it out by yourself.
Sure. Well, you guys are selling it pretty well here. Bob, you just mentioned the economics. Doing a partnered search means you split the economics. You guys did a traditional search fund. We're going to get to that in a second, why you chose to go that path. But just to get it out there, these are kind of industry standard numbers. I'm just going to share with the audience that if you do a traditional search fund, solo traditional search fund, your equity ends up being 25%, assuming you hit all of the performance thresholds. You'll have 25% of the business ownership. If you do a partnered search, you'll have collectively 30%, which means each of you have 15. So the kind of economic decision you're making is, do I want to own 25% of a business by myself or 15% of a business with a partner? And then you say to yourself, well, with a partner, I'm more likely to be successful, to find a business, and then in that business to be more successful. My downside is mitigated, at least you hope you feel. And then the kind of intangible, Bob, you said that it's more fun to do it. So that's kind of the attaching some numbers to the calculus, which I think is important. Aside from having to split the money, split the pot, are there any other downsides? I mean, I guess that the partnership implodes. That's the obvious one. But anything more specific? Or is that really, it's just the partnership might not work out? That's the big downside, I guess.
Yeah, I think, but going into kind of what does it look like when a partnership, implodes or something like that? I think there's partnerships early on that can, reach, inevitably you're going to have disagreements on the path forward. And I think how you resolve those, just like any other relationship is going to determine that. So I think if you're unable in a partnership to get over those kind of things, I think it can really paralyze a search and a business. If you've got kind of misalignment in goals, like Bob talked about at the beginning, that could prevent you from finding a business. That could have you pass on really good opportunities as well. So 1 + 1 could equal 3, but it could also equal 0 pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I would say also that we talked to a lot of our friends that searched for longer than we did. Admittedly, we found a business pretty quickly, so our partnership in the search phase wasn't strained in a way that it could have been if say it lingered on into late into the second year, where there kind of is that urgency to find something, or else you're going to kind of walk away without a business. But we talked to some of our colleagues who are still searching, and when you have to do that pivot away from kind of, okay, what is our strategy? Are we going more broad based on a search versus kind of this very focused thing that we started with? Or, hey, that magical unicorn healthcare business that we were seeking out doesn't seem to exist at the price that we want to pay for it. We need to kind of broaden the aperture here. I think having that discussion, if you're doing the search by yourself, obviously you can just change tact. But when there's a second person, you have to get kind of buy-in from. I can imagine that could be kind of stressful. I think the thing that always helps, and we remind them is, hey, the ultimate goal here is to buy a great business and run it and be successful. So, don't let that kind of the tactics on how you get there cloud that ultimate goal. And I think what we always have done, and we did in our search, and we do it now in the operating phase, is you try things. You try things. You try one partner's way, then the other partner's way. Go really hard at that for maybe a month or two, and if it's not working, then you can pivot.
somebody touched on the fact that there was, Tyrel, your kind of contribution to the dating period was actually really kind of codifying some of the characteristics, measuring stuff, making this a quantifiable, like a quantified exercise. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, it comes from my engineering background. It's funny when you look at it. I built a spreadsheet and a checklist and all these things to kind of diligence it out. And I think one of the benefits, we call it like dating, but if you show up to a date with a spreadsheet ready to go, your date's probably going to walk away. Whereas at least in a business partnership, you can actually be very upfront about that and say, well, hey, here's kind of like some criteria that we should talk about. So I think you can be a little bit more objective as well. So that's what I did. I built a checklist. I sat down with Bob and we went through it.
We don't have time to go through line by line because this is a 50 line or more spreadsheet. Literally, I'm looking at it in front of me. Yeah, 50, 60. So we're not going to go through line by line, obviously, but you could bucket the parameters into 3 different buckets. Can you share what those were?
Yeah, and so in the checklist, and I thought about my answer a little more. I think the goals and financial alignment is like really important upfront. Like, what do you want to get out of this, right? If this goes sideways, are you going to be really upset? What's your minimum like walk away number? What's the biggest upside here? Are we aligned in that? What type of business? All those sorts of goals. That's one bucket. Second bucket I put in there was kind of a skills assessment. And that's like rank yourself. Like, what do you think you're good at? And where are we going to play when we acquire one of these things? Because it's going to take a lot of different skills. That's important for 2 reasons. One, you can kind of allocate where you are, but also where you need help. And I think Bob and I both didn't come from an investing background. So when we get into why we chose traditional, that kind of like pointed us towards that model. Hey, we need to get a deal done. So skills, goals. And the third one I think is kind of that fit Bob talked about as well. That's that kind of like, do I like this person? Do we get along as well? And kind of like, side plus is the spouse as well. So you'll notice in that checklist, I had some questions for kind of, Julia that we had to go and grab dinner all together and see if we could, make sure my fiance didn't hate Bob or something like that, or vice versa.
If Bob comes and lives with us, how will you feel about it?
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Great. Well, that was great, Tyrel. And just going back up to the goals one in particular, the value of this exercise is not just, applying a methodology to whether or not you and Bob are compatible, but it also forces you to think through these questions on your own, which you might not have. It's probably healthy to go into any big project like a search, kind of knowing your own goal or what your number is or what where you're trying to go or et cetera. So thinking through it's kind of a doubly beneficial exercise for that reason. The other thing I'd say just about it's easy to tease about bringing a spreadsheet to this exercise, but in HR, hiring is getting kind of much more scientific, and there's all kinds of like measurement models and personality tests that are industry standard these days. And it's not unlike something like that. I mean, where you're kind of trying to tease out what this person, kind of all the parameters that you just described, Tyrel. So HR managers are not shy about using kind of systems. So no reason that a couple of searchers would be either. Great. Well, just so it's not all roses, guys, tell the people where your partnership has not been perfect. Just give us a taste of the behind the scenes on days when the partnership doesn't feel like you're just besties.
I would say, during the search phase, one period where it was, I would say not strained, but where we were under intense pressure was, when we were looking to acquire TransTech. We found the company and went under LOI for TransTech, 4 months in, and it was the furthest we had been on a deal. We were under a time pressure to try and get this thing done in a quick manner so that we could kind of enter the industry, kind of meet our own kind of timeline, meet the seller's timeline. And we had questions around, okay, do we have all the information that we need to feel comfortable about this? Are we foregoing other opportunities and kind of a push and pull on that? And like Tyrel mentioned, neither of us had come from banking or private equity or investing background before. And so, as you're answering these questions for your investors who are, intentionally prodding you and forcing you to defend your decision to invest in the company, it instills, some self-doubt that manifests where you and your partner are going to have those same types of arguments or discussions like internally. Nothing obviously that stopped us from buying the company, but I think those periods where you're forced to say, hey, how confident are we in this business? How confident are we in our ability to run this business? I think those are very healthy, and it's I think that was probably the most intense. It was just a very busy couple months still.
And by the way, when you guys were looking at acquiring TransTech or making the decision to do it, was one of you more enthusiastic than the other, and was that delta big?
I think it moved in waves. I think what was funny is I think we played that in different roles, because I think if I remember right, like Bob was like really into the CDL training space early on, and I was like, okay, this is interesting, this is cool. And at some point the deal kind of like switched, where it was like I was really bullish on it, and I was convincing Bob like, come on, let's go do this thing. And I think we kind of ebbed and flowed and did that maybe a couple times over it. And I think Bob hit the nail on the head of like, it's those moments where you have to like kind of resolve the issue. And I remember like we sat down and it was like, look, you have a veto. Like either of us have a veto. I'm not doing this if you don't want to do this, kind of thing. And giving that kind of assurance of like, I'm going to drag you on this adventure just because I believe it. So if I'm missing something here, you pull the ripcord, we're out. And so anyways, I think it ebbed and flowed. I don't know, Bob, if that kind of.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was one of those things very early on. We loved the industry and we loved the space, but then it's always like, well, is this the right horse to bet on? Is this something that that we think that we can do? Just because we're early, we did have kind of a 2-year timeline, and we're 4 or 5 months into this thing. Have we had enough reps? Are we the right person to buy this company? I think all kind of normal fears to have going into a deal as kind of a young person who's about to take over a big business.
Yeah. Yep. It's a good point about the finding a deal early, especially doing a traditional search fund where you have this 2-year number in your head. You're just kind of, your psychology is anchored to 2 years. And so if you're you're really far away from that 2 years, you're only a few months in, it's almost like, like you said, Bob, it's like you just have this, like, I feel like we're too early, even if you found the right business. It's kind of a dangerous psychological trap. I mean, you could have walked from a great opportunity just because you felt like, shouldn't we be closer to 2 years before we actually do the thing, pull the trigger?
Well,
great, guys.
Please. I would just mention also, it's funny because we discovered CDL training very early on in the space. We kind of entered the thesis thinking training and blue collar, plumbing schools, electrician training. We'd heard that that's a great model. But when we stumbled on CDL training like 2 months in, we had TransTech on our board in like July when we started in June. So it was not even like 4 months in, it was like 2 months in when we had found this company. It took us another couple months to get in contact with them. But it was, the fact that it was early, I think that was definitely something that weighed on our ability to say, and fairly judge the company.
Guys, just to finish out the kind of context of your search before we move forward. So why did you choose traditional? We haven't even talked about that. Some of the reasons to do a traditional search fund are kind of the support of your investors and the support of the whole kind of ecosystem there. So kind of the desire for more support doing this for the first time is a common thing that you'll hear traditional searchers say. But part of that box is now checked by doing a partnered search. You have each other, you have support in each other. So maybe it minimizes the need for that support a little bit. You still decided to do a traditional search. Talk us through that, please.
Yeah, I think the easier answer is, man, I was broke after MBA school.
Okay, easy enough.
I had bills to pay. That's needed an income. But I think the second part too is like traditional is actually a really good solution to some of the like financial, like it's kind of split right down the middle, right? It makes all those questions very easy of like, what are we, we're each going to make the same. I think when you go self-funded and that route and you're supporting your own income, it gets a lot harder in month 18 when you're going, hey, I've got a wife, I've got kids or something, like, how are we going to split this? Who's going to eat this broken deal fee? Are we splitting that right down the middle? I think that gets a lot more difficult. Whereas when you raise a fund, it's like, not to say it's house money, but you don't have to, tit for tat who's paying for diligence fees when the deal breaks.
Yeah. Bob, do you want to add anything to that, or is that pretty much
it? I think, like Tyrel said, I had literally handfuls of dollars in my bank account when I graduated business school. But, I think also I would say, harping back on that point, that neither of us came from investing. We had investor groups who were, really eager about working with us, who had done this hundreds of times combined between them. People who had walked the path by themselves, investors who had done search funds and operated and now are investors. To try and put a number on that experience, I think would be kind of foolish, because it's similar to why did you choose to partner? Why did you choose to go with investors? All these things I saw, and I think we saw, as strengthening our ability to find a good company and get the deal done, which is ultimately the end game, because you try and preserve all the economics you want up front by going by yourself and doing a self-funded search. I personally didn't feel like that my percent chance likelihood of acquiring a good company with that kind of setup behind me, I didn't think the percentage was high enough for me to take that chance.
And now that you're in it and you're operating the business, acquired the business, you're operating it. Is there anything about the traditional search fund model that is different than you expected? Anything that you've learned now that you're further into the path?
Yeah, I think, the traditional model, it lends itself to this, find a good company and platform business, right? You got to buy a little bit of bigger company. You got to grow it a little faster. It's a little further out before you're in distribution land where you're sitting on $1 million of EBITDA and you're content with that. So I think there is a little bit more pressure, obviously, from the investor base and a little bit more control on their side. Where I think that's super helpful is as a first-time CEO, to have someone who's built it 3-4 times come through and sit on your board has been huge, and it kind of also settles maybe some debate between us of hey, what do we do next to have a experienced investor come in and be hey, do this. Where it can be frustrating is I think obviously you have disagreements with your board and you have to be able to present your case, but I think that's a skill you're going to have to learn over the course of your time in business. It's not always going to be just solo entrepreneur. If you grow a company to $100 million result, inevitably you're going to have other stakeholders come in and you're going to have to manage those.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, I would add to that. I would say, as search funds kind of grow in popularity and more people enter the space on the entrepreneur side who are looking for investors to partner with, I think there are going to be you have to do your homework on who the people are and how much value they're really going to provide. Because similarly, like you mentioned, on the counterpoint of maybe doing a self-funded search, you're giving up a lot in terms of economics for someone to write a check, and a lot of people can write a check. And so you want to partner with people that not only are going to be able to fund you but also provide a lot of that advice, and kind of view search funds and acquiring a small business and running a small business the same ways as you do. Because if someone approaches this from a private equity angle and says, this person is no different than just a hired gun CEO or something like that, and similarly should be given a smaller piece of the equity, I think that's kind of it definitely does not lend well to the searcher having a healthy relationship with that investor. And I think there are a lot of really great investors out there who are the right type of people to partner with. And I think Tyrel and I did a good job of finding those investors and partnering with them.
Mm-hmm. And we'll just give us a little bit more on that, Bob. What would you tell people out there about investor selection?
I think what we did really well was because we were looking to buy a blue collar business, we intensely kind of quizzed our investors and kind of flipped the script on them. Talk about some of the blue collar businesses that you've invested in. A lot of investors have kind of cut their teeth, I think, on a lot of the SaaS software healthcare businesses over the last decade or so. Tyrel and I knew we weren't going to buy one of those. So, if that's something you're looking to do, you're probably not the right investor for us. We also asked some questions around, talk about the deals that you didn't invest in. The last 5 deals that you didn't invest in, why didn't you do it? And you can kind of tease out some of those reasons, and say, hey, could I see the investor doing this to me? Is this something that would, a year and a half in, and I find a pretty good business here that I think we can make work, and checks a lot of boxes for me personally, but that investor doesn't feel like it's a good fit for their portfolio. Do I really want to be kind of beholden to that, or do I want to kind of set the groundwork at the beginning to be successful?
Yeah. And I think, a lot of reasons why searchers don't end up acquiring a business isn't because they didn't find a good one. I think it's because they built a cap table that wouldn't work together to actually like close on it on the traditional side. Similar to self-funded searchers on not being able to like finance it with SBA, so like design with the end in mind, I think, rather than the prestige or the AUM of whatever investor you have, I know investors get mad kind of when searchers interview them, but I think a really helpful question to ask is, tell me about a deal you invested in that was borderline. Like more likely than not, I'm going to find a business with 2 of 3 magic qualities, recurring revenue, low customer concentration, low CapEx, or low cyclicality kind of being those magic 3. Like chances are I'm going to find one that's got 2 and I'm going to have to build the 3rd into my business. Like tell me about one of those. And I think as the space gets more saturated with investors, you don't have to be a good investor to invest in a business with all 3. Those deals will get done, 10 days out of 10. It's more likely that you're going to have to pull together a cap table around a business that's got 2 of 3. So tell me about a time you did that. I think that's a good question.
Those are great, guys. Those were really helpful. Okay, well, let's talk about your interest in blue collar businesses. Why were you so focused on that category?
I think what's underrated about blue collar businesses is a lot of them haven't experienced the efficiency gains of the last 20 years or productivity gains that come to all these SaaS models popping up. By that, I mean, our company, for example, was doing payroll on paper still. Well, there's off-the-shelf SaaS products to help kind of add to those sorts of things. But they have a great core product that you don't have to redesign. It's essential, and they've got great people around them. So we saw it as really underutilized, where I think there's this fear of searchers who usually come from the white collar world, and they fear that these employees will reject them and hate them and move on. But we kind of came from companies that had a blue collar background, so we didn't quite have that fear. But we knew there was still this big upside of bringing a little technology into it to succeed in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to put a finer point, I guess, on that payroll example, because I think it's a good one. Because you might say, oh, well, these MBAs just buy a business and they put a payroll in and they mission accomplished. But what that really does, that allows us to do, is not only does it free up more time for our bookkeeper to work on, hey, let's improve the cash conversion cycle. Let's go after some of these efficiencies on the cost side by being able to put in a non-paper payroll system. Leveraging kind of the skills that Tyrel and I got from our previous experience, that says, okay, hey, actually we're spending too much on this site. Our hours per student is 20% higher here versus this other site. So let's reconfigure the team, reconfigure the operating model at that site, and all of those gains go to the bottom line. But that's something that you don't have any visibility into if you just are doing everything on paper. So that switch over isn't just like a cosmetic change. It is pure productivity that you can inject into the business. It allows you to have better managerial oversight into a business that is spending a lot of money on people, but figuring out, okay, how can we get everyone kind of up to that best practice site that we already have in our organization?
Mm-hmm.
And those productivity gains, like payroll and stuff like that, generally don't piss off your core group of employees in the same sense. Like by that, I mean, you're not coming in and telling them, hey, here's how you train truck drivers better. And I think a lot of people think of that with blue collar. It's actually a lot of the gains are on the back end of the system where the employees are already frustrated. That's like, why can't I get my pay stub same day? Why can't I just open an app and get my pay stub? And so like, there is a little bit of like coaching the administration through change management, but I think you get to keep your core employees, happy. You're not kind of messing up the special sauce there.
That's a great point, Tyrel, that like when you think about change, because we talk about change management, how difficult it is, how delicate it is, when to do it, et cetera. But this distinction between kind of front of the house and back of the house, where the front of the house stuff is like where you're getting in there and trying to change the actual service that's being delivered, and how much touchier that probably is and how much less equipped you probably are to be doing that anyway. Whereas back of the house stuff is kind of the taste like chicken sort of thing, where it's like, every business has a payroll system or not. And implementing that is probably going to be a gain that can be achieved. And it's decoupled from what's going on in the service delivery, which is really where people are going to be territorial. Maybe that's naive. Maybe the bookkeeper is also territorial about how he or she does payroll. But anyway. But by the way, on the question of one of my favorite questions about this culture difference between white collar and blue collar. I mean, you guys, yes, you have worked in blue collar businesses, but come on, you're a couple of Harvard MBAs rolling into this business. How did that go?
Yeah, I think, it's still always going to be a struggle. You're always going to be kind of the boss. You're always going to be that. But I think one thing I like to remind people about blue collar businesses is that everyone's afraid of, it's all these employee issues, and I'm going to have to deal with, all these different abuses that I wouldn't in white collar. But I like to remind people the measure of success is a lot more objective in the blue collar world. By that I mean, it's how many jobs did you get done? Did you show up on work? Do you have a good attitude? The ways that you can kind of like quantify an employee's effectiveness, I think is very clear. And I think that makes it easier to make decisions as a manager. By this, I mean, in the white collar world, if someone shows up, 10, 15 minutes late every day, but does a really good job, it's actually a really, really hard decision to, let them go or make changes or something like that. In the blue collar world, if they're showing up 15 minutes late to a job every single time, whether that's HVAC or class or something like that, well, it's a pretty objective decision as to what needs to happen or coaching moment. So I like to tell people, don't worry about that stuff. And if you think that any of the abuses aren't prominent in the white collar world, I think you just don't know the employee universe that well either.
Well, I had it pointed out recently also that we overstate the difference between I think this is related to your point, Tyrel, the fragility of a business with 500 SDE versus 1.5 million versus 3 million. This person had been in businesses of all those sizes. And it's like the idea that you get to 1.5 million or 3 million in EBITDA and it's a well-functioning machine is completely naive. Like the dysfunction exists at that level too, but believe me. So maybe it's kind of also related to just like thinking that, this one category of business, blue collar businesses, things are crazy, but in white collar businesses, everything is just, like a finely tuned machine, also naive. Bob, I think it looks like you wanted to add something.
I would just say also, I think Tyrel's point on the kind of the objective measure of success is great, but I also think that there's a serious level of respect present. I think in blue collar businesses, I think in a white collar business, it is kind of hard to measure who's just kind of showing up and who's actually putting in a lot of hard effort here. I think with our blue collar businesses, what we found is, especially the employees that are long tenured here, the reason they're doing this job is because they really care about it. We work with instructors who have been here for 25 years, and I think that shows, I think, a different level of commitment, showing up to teach people how to drive a truck every day. Maybe even so than someone who says, I've been at the same accounting firm for 25 years or something like that. Especially when these guys who are truck driver trainers, they've got a really strong alternative of going out on the road and earning more money driving a truck. But they've chosen to stay at TransTech for a reason. And I think that's something that I think that can't be discounted.
There's lots of different types of blue collar businesses, of course. And you had decided that a men in trucks business was what you were targeting. Of course, instead you bought a business that puts men in trucks. But I guess that is to say, like, manufacturing wasn't necessarily on your list. It was more kind of like, field crew type businesses. What was that interest about?
Well, we liked the ring of it when we pitched it to investors because it usually meant like some sort of B2B services business. Somebody going around route density problems, like things that lend well in the search universe. We obviously expanded that. I think Bob did a whole kind of automotive manufacturing look, like supplier look as well. I did some oil and gas stuff too. So we didn't totally stick to that as well, but we did end up buying a company that puts men in trucks.
You did also develop a thesis. So you were really kind of, as traditional searchers tend to do more, I think, than self-funded searchers, really kind of going down rabbit holes and exploring industries, making arguments to yourselves and then presenting them to investors. And you developed a thesis around CDLs and training. Talk us through that.
Yeah. So I think how we stumbled upon CDL training was very early on. We spent some days talking to people that were in the freight business. I think early on in your search, you look at a lot of really bad deals. And I would say a lot of the trucking companies that we saw early on could be quantified as bad deals. Very cyclical, high capex, seem to be trading at a high watermark given kind of the supply chain crisis over the last couple of years. So talking to some of those businesses, we realized, okay, these probably aren't the ones for us. But we always like to ask owners, what's the hardest part of your job? What's the thing that you just can't seem to solve? Because I think that would point us at, is there an opportunity to improve the business? What's the next 5 years going to look like for this business? And at this point, everyone was saying, last summer, we can't find any drivers. And so we were like, oh, that's interesting. We kind of looked into the space and said, okay, well, who trains truck drivers? Is it community colleges? Is it, Teamsters? Are there private businesses that do this thing? Pretty quickly, we discovered, okay, there's this network of very small, fragmented, one-shop operations that do truck driver training. So if you're in Des Moines, Iowa, you might have the local truck driver training school. But there are also these schools who would kind of seem to achieve some kind of escape velocity, where if 90% of the schools that train truck drivers are just kind of one-shop operations, there are, a handful of these schools that have, 3, 5, maybe 10 plus sites. And so we talked to some of those owners as well. And what we discovered was, economically, they're great. It's a instruction, or it's an education business. So, it's got really strong gross margins, and I think, a lot of operating leverage in the business that is nice. So if you can increase enrollment, a lot of that falls to the bottom line. But behind that, what you see is this mega trend that over the next decade or so, we're going to have a million truck drivers leave the industry. The American Trucking Association forecasts that there's going to be a 500,000 driver shortage in the next 10 years. And so you say, well, okay, that sounds like a bad reason to be in instruction. They can't find people to fill these jobs. We kind of looked at it the other way. We said, hey, all these jobs need to be filled. There is a lot of reshoring going on as kind of trade patterns change. We were looking at the Southeast being kind of a beneficiary of a lot of these reshoring efforts. More manufacturing, more warehouses. You just have to drive up I-85. You see all these battery plants that are being developed. Those are all jobs that require truck drivers. To put a cap on that, college is getting really expensive, and college doesn't really have the payback that it used to, especially for marginal students. When I say marginal students, maybe think of the bottom 20% of a local college, the kids that are going there and they might take 6 years or go for a couple of years, drop out, and they've got a huge student loan bill. That is not the college promise that is being sold in high schools. And I think that message, the genie is kind of out of the bottle on that, and it's getting back to people and saying, hey, I need to look at a path that doesn't require college. On the high end, that could be like boot camps, but I think we saw that trade schools fill a really big need there. So the combination of, okay, hey, truckers are kind of going to be in short supply over the next decade or so. We think that's going to cause wages to go up. So what does that do? It increases the value of an education, and it lends more people to say, hey, that trucking job that maybe paid $45,000 a couple of years ago. Well, if they can't find people, now it's paying $75,000, $80,000, and I'm getting a signing bonus. And as someone who maybe has a high school diploma, that's a really attractive thing. And we wanted to be the school that provided that.
I know to add on, we played up the counter cyclicality of vocational training. If you look at the macro conditions and you go, wow, we're headed for a recession or something, these signs are in the water. Vocational training is kind of the place I think millennials will snap to when it actually comes time to, put food on the table. When there's no more jobs where you can ride a slide down at the Twitter HQ, you might have to drive a truck to make ends meet or something like that. So we think it's pretty recession resistant. And we've noticed that too, as kind of the labor market has loosened up a little bit. We get more phone calls.
Well, guys, so this is fascinating because you're really hitting upon a potentially seismic change in the workforce and a cultural change. Not to belabor this, but as we all know, college became something that everybody needs to do over the last, generation or two. And now we're realizing first of all, that there's a shortage of people to do the trades and blue collar work. And second of all, that was probably wrong-headed to begin with. Not everybody needs to go to a 4-year college, if for no other reason than the ROI isn't even there, but many other reasons as well. But to see that pendulum swing back, that's a big bet. I mean, TBD. I mean, we're all talking about that, but that is a big bet. And it's not one that you're going to see unfold, from now to 2028. Like, this is going to take a generation to work itself through, if indeed it does even work itself through. So, and you guys are probably on a little bit of a tighter timeline than that. Can you respond? I mean, are trade schools really going to be the thing in 2027? I mean, will it move that quickly, do you really think?
Depends on the macro environment on how quick it moves. I think that's the easy hand wave there. But I think we've already seen it in the marketplace where, our phones started ringing off the hook when UPS raised truck driver wages, and they had a big headline that said, top pay like 160 grand, 170 grand. So I think, the underpinnings are already happening in that space. I think, the biggest question we got is, what do you think about autonomous trucks? And Bob and I, think that's still a ways out. That's not a 2027 kind of like solution. Now there's no drivers in the cabs. And we see it as this really essential piece, like why is the price of milk going up? It's also we're paying truck drivers more, because there's a shortage. So we saw it as this essential piece. You just can't replace overnight either.
And I would say, to that as well, it is a big bet, but in the interim, we have companies beating down our door for drivers, so we can wait for the market of people to say, hey, this is a great opportunity. But on the flip side, I think one thing that Tyrel and I have really focused on this year, and I think we've done a pretty decent job at it, is answering those companies' calls where we say, hey, we need 100 drivers this year. And we have a ton of people who are reaching out to us about applying for a big grocery chain or a big, warehousing operation or something like that. And we got to get them CDLs. Or, I've got a bunch of guys who work in a warehouse who don't have their CDL, and I can't find anybody who does have one because that change maybe hasn't happened yet in the wider market. At the very least, will you just train all of my guys for me? And for us as the CDL school, that's even better in some ways. And we think about our school and sometimes as like a matchmaker. You've got people who have this aspiration to upskill, make more money in their life, find a great job on the other side, and you got companies who want to find that talent. Just like hospital systems have that desire to find great nurses, just like software companies have a real desire to find great software engineers. The same thing exists for trucking companies, and maybe even more so. They are desperate to find safe, professionally trained drivers because they are just they are so important.
This is where I ask that obnoxiously smart sounding question. Are CDL schools really just are they recruiting agencies masquerading as educational school? You're not in the education business. You're actually in the recruiting agency business. Is there some truth to that? That really it's kind of. You just said you're kind of a matchmaker, which is what recruiting agencies also do. How do you respond?
I think some companies do that. I think TransTech, we can be. If you're a student who wants it all, you want the training, you want us to find a job for you, you want us to then check on you in 6 months and find you another job because you don't like the job that we put you in the first time, we can do that. So I think we can do that really well. I think maybe the better read into it is we give students who don't have a lot of options, or people who are making not that much money, who have never really had a really good path. We give them a path. We give them the training that says we're going to put you into a really big industry that has a lot of different ways to play in it. And like the CDL training is just kind of that gateway to getting there. If you're a guy who has a high school diploma and making $25,000 a year, working at a local construction job, we can get you a CDL and you'll be making $65,000, $70,000 right out of school. And then in 2 years, you can be making $120,000 working at Amazon or Walmart or UPS. I think we can do the recruiting and the staffing part of it. But I think what our students come to us for is that independence and those options.
And to be clear, just about CDLs. So is it because it's all manner. So you mentioned Amazon. So we're in UPS. We have Amazon and UPS trucks driving all over our neighborhoods. Of course, those aren't big 18-wheelers. Those are much smaller trucks. So is there just kind of a blanket CDL, or are there different types of CDLs? And so is it always necessarily about driving like a big rig 18-wheeler? Is that the same training as somebody driving a school bus? Same training as somebody driving a brown UPS truck? Or how does that break out real quick?
Yeah, so the class system is based on weight and basically the layout of the vehicle. So Class A is those tractor trailers. So that's kind of your maximum amount of training. Basically, every state in the United States, it's going to take you 160 hours to do that is the state minimum. Some programs will run even longer. So that's kind of your tractor trailer. That's what everyone thinks about with truck drivers, of which Amazon has a whole fleet of those, and so does UPS. The last mile delivery trucks, it depends on the weight. And so big box trucks, like the maximum size U-Haul you have, if you loaded that full of lead, would actually fall into what's called Class B. And so that's your weight of an attached vehicle. So garbage trucks fall into this, passenger buses fall into this category, other things like that. Most of those delivery trucks you see, like the Amazon trucks without kind of the driver's side door for them to jump out, those aren't commercial vehicles. And so they don't fall into A or B. But there is a ton of vehicles that fall into the B class, as we're discovering as we get more into the business. The other interesting piece is what's called the passenger endorsement. So in those cases where you have more than 16 passengers, you need to have trained on a vehicle like that. And why that's important is because there's so many school buses out there, coach buses, all those sorts of things. And it means that those Class A drivers that train on a tractor trailer can't go do that job unless they train on a passenger vehicle. So it's this problem that exists that perpetuates the school bus driver shortage and all this other thing. And Class B, I'll mention, kind of varies state to state. Whereas Class A is 4 weeks, no problem. North Carolina, it's 4 weeks Class B, anyways, which is kind of crazy. Other states, it's only 2 weeks. So it depends state to state what Class B looks like.
Okay, well, so we're talking about all these kind of different types of ways that somebody might use a CDL. And I think, Bob, you mentioned, like, when you were talking to other business owners about, in kind of men in trucks businesses, they were all complaining that they couldn't find people with CDLs. And yet it does feel very tied explicitly to the trucking industry, like big rigs, 18-wheelers. So does that actually comprise kind of most of your customers are people trying to become big rig truck drivers? I mean, how coupled to the big rig trucking industry is your business?
So I think a lot of the students that approach us that are kind of paying their own way want to become a truck driver. Our prototypical student, and I would say 75, 80% of them probably want to drive a big rig. Most of them, prototypical students, would say, my dad was a truck driver, my uncle was, I had a brother who came to TransTech and he's having a good time out on the road, he's making good money. So that's why I wanted to. A lot of the reason for that is the pay is better. The optionality is better. It's not just kind of that over the road where people are away for a couple weeks. You could get into a company that has kind of a dedicated route, and you might just be driving from Charlotte up to Richmond and back every day. And, you make $110,000 a year, and you got your own truck, and you never have to sleep in a rest stop. And I think that's a pretty good option for them. I would say the rest of our students, want to work for the Charlotte area transit system, CATS. They want to drive a bus potentially. They might want to drive a dump truck. There's some dump trucks that require a Class A. If you're working at like a mine or something like that, they look at those jobs like kind of in the hills of North Carolina, and there's a lot of those out there. But I think a lot of the employers that we see sponsoring drivers to us kind of fall outside of that 18-wheeler industry. They're not the big long haul truckers. These are companies that are tree removal companies. They are I would say like the school bus districts. They run transit systems. They run kind of waste hauling, things like that, where it requires a Class B or maybe a Class A if you're like a utility company and hauling and have a trailer behind you. So there's a big addressable market out there beside kind of the classic 18-wheeler market. The reason why 18-wheelers and kind of long haul is such a nice market to serve into as a training provider, though, is these companies hire 10,000 drivers a year because there's like 100% turnover in their driver pools. So they're always hiring. There's always a need to fill drivers there. So students see that and they see a pretty attainable path for them.
Go ahead, Tyrel.
Sorry, yeah, to add on what Bob was saying, I think employers are recognizing too having kind of more versatility between your employees is better. So we get a call from, a lot of public works departments who are like, hey, I've only got one commercial driver, and when he's sick, our crew's down. No one can go unclog the street drain. So why don't we train his helper and also get him the CDL? Amazon's model is also kind of like that, where a lot of their warehouse kind of switchers can also do a short haul as well. So I think there's a lot of value that companies can get for having full-time drivers still be licensed.
Part of the reason I'm digging so deep into this, guys, is because I got off our pre-call and I loved the business. Promptly went to Google Maps and searched for CDL license schools, training schools around my area, and just like you said, up here in Northern Virginia, DC area, there's tons, and they all appear to be very kind of small. Not tons, but there's a lot. And they appear to be kind of very small mom and pop operations. So I'm here, I'm sitting here stroking my chin. And so one of the things you just said, Tyrel, is like, you've now both touched on the fact that you serve end customers who are people who typically aspire to be a long haul truck driver. And then you serve businesses who are getting their employees skilled up. What's the split? First, just really quick, really briefly?
It depends. Last year, I would have told you, 40-60 for business to consumer, and that rides a lot on the freight market. This year, I think, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, it's probably like 80-20. It's tough sometimes to discern what's actually a business because you might have a cash pay come in, but it's really an employer that has 2 employees. We would still consider that like an individual versus here's a contract 50 driver kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And then I'm just curious about the opportunity in the fragmentation and how so many of these operations are mom and pop around the country. So now talking to myself and talking to other searchers out there who might be intrigued by this industry as well. When a business, a corporation needs to skill up a bunch of employees with CDLs, I assume that you have a competitive advantage in being more of a professional operation, that they'll want to work with a TransTech rather than Bob's CDL parking lot. Is that true? I mean, are big corporations really working with really kind of these tiny mom and pops to get their people skilled up?
No, I would say they typically don't. If you think about the big companies, the ones that you would know the names of these companies, they look at TransTech and they say, this is an operation that has 8 branches around the state. They can touch, everyone in the state that wants to become a truck driver it should be within an hour drive of a TransTech branch, and also kind of that professionalization. Our sites they're bigger, they're cleaner. We've got more instructors. We've got more third-party CDL testers than anybody else in the state. So if you're a business and you're looking to kind of do that end-to-end service, you don't want to know, you don't want to have to know that the local CDL operation, well, they only start a class every month or every 2 months or something like that because they only got 2 instructors. TransTech, we've got 40 instructors. We start a class every Monday. We can slip seat the guys in there. We've got an online CDL training program that we've got, so we can kind of work with the employers, and we've got a great recruiting and sales staff that helps meet the flexible needs of those employers that can't afford to lose 15 guys all at once to get their CDL, but they want to get all of them trained. So how do I schedule those in? If you're a community college, if you're a small operation, it might take you a couple months to get them all in, if they can even manage that. For us, we can get those guys kind of knocked out in a way that works with the employer's schedule as well.
Yeah. So a lot of competitive differentiation for you guys comes from your size and scale. I want to keep hammering on kind of the industry overall and also talk more about just trade schools broadly, but we haven't talked about TransTech directly yet. So let's do that. You had it on your whiteboard, and then you actually got your hands on it. So tell us the story there, and then tell us about the business, more bullet points about the business, particularly in numbers, revenue numbers and employee numbers, if you could.
Yeah. So we ran a bunch of proprietary outreach. Kind of Bob, asked the question of these freight folks. We start looking into schools. We do some, Googling. We build a list. And so that kind of led us in the direction of TransTech and a couple other schools. So it was on our board. We wrote it down. We reached out to them and they just ghosted us, and we were like, hey, you know what, whatever, this happens 200 times a week with our proprietary system. But turns out they were preparing for a sale. So it ended up being a brokered deal. And so I was on Interexo one day and I saw it pop up. It was, top deal there. I clicked it. I sent it to Bob. I said, do you think this is what I think it is? And he said, yeah. And we got the SIM, worked out with the broker, and then kind of, the rest is history.
Great. And was the seller surprised to see you again after you had some interaction with them, then they ghosted you, and then you popped up again the moment the SIM hit the market?
I don't know if they remembered us. Maybe we hit junk mail. No. Maybe we hit something. They weren't like, hey, we remember you. We got to know them kind of more over the deal process. But yeah, we probably are in a deleted recycle bin email somewhere.
Oh, so when you say they ghosted you, you never got a reply. You had never had any interaction with them at all. Oh,
exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep.
Okay, and so you give us again, please, a picture of the business. You've already said, I guess, 40 instructors, locations all over North Carolina, but give us some more bullet points again, please.
Yeah. So the business is about $7 million in top line, or when we acquired it was about $7 million in top line, about 1.5 in EBITDA, and we acquired it for about 5-ish times EBITDA. The business also, in terms of like growth over the last couple of years, 15 to 30% annual top line growth over the last couple of years. A lot of that through kind of new site expansion, a lot of that through new customers that they've brought on, and just some of the kind of the macro growth. I think what we've seen even in our tenure running the business is it's pretty easy to talk to more people in North Carolina from a marketing standpoint. Investing in that has a really nice payback.
What do you mean talking to more people in North Carolina? Just increasing the marketing?
Increasing the marketing channels. So, working with businesses to find their employees, but really directly just saying, hey, we've got a new branch opening in this side. Start investing in radio, investing in digital marketing, things like that. Really easy for us, I think, to turn that knob and uncover a lot more opportunity. So even beyond that 15 to 20% growth rate that you saw over the last couple of years, you can think that it's a really nice direct payback when you invest in marketing. You see lead flow kind of jump up with that. So the TAM's even kind of bigger in the state than I think we thought when we acquired the business.
Well, but I do have to push on the historic growth of the last couple of years because, of course, trucking benefited enormously from COVID. So those growth numbers, in your own mind, are going to probably cut. If you did nothing, if you didn't amp up your own marketing, those numbers would probably recede some. No, I mean, and by the way, the trucking industry, the headlines today for the trucking industry are not great. So for this exact moment in time, it seems to be suffering. Now, as you said, it's a very cyclical market. So address all of that, please.
Yeah, I think, back to the comment of finding investors that are willing to invest in a business that has kind of 2 or 3 magic qualities. I think that's something, we address every day is, the cyclicality of the freight market is something TransTech needs to move away from long term. We need to be able to serve those customers when times are good, but I think if we hang our hat on it, that's going to pose trouble for the business. So I think our focus has been, let's focus on some of these non-cyclical CDL requirements like school bus operators and, waste collectors and those sorts of things as well. So you're absolutely right, Will. Part of that growth is spurred on when, the sun's shining there, you're making hay, but we want to make sure the sun's always shining, not just when there's a supply chain disruption.
And so that sounds like it would be a pretty big strategic move as new owners would be to diversify who you're training away from over-reliance on the trucking industry.
Well, the federal government's also helped us out a little bit with some regulation too. So it's not, starting from square one. In 2022, the federal government introduced some legislation that made it harder for employers to train their own employees, especially in that Class B market. I think there's a lake of employers right now that are saying, well, how the heck do I run a training program? Do I even want to run a training program now that I've got these extra compliance requirements? So, one thing that excites us about the business is potentially moving into the kind of that compliance management space or being that, white label solution for a company that wants to train drivers. That would kind of fill out that 3 of 3 we're looking for in a business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And TransTech, in terms of employees, Bob, I think you'd mentioned 40 teachers, instructors, and then I assume you've got 10 or 15 in kind of back office. How many employees are there at the business?
Yeah, but I think we have 68 employees actually. So we're a little bit more, I think, on the back office than the number you quoted. But a lot of that comes from, we've got recruiters that are staffed kind of for every branch, knowing the local market, and so that's I think we've got 7 now. And then also you've got kind of the compliance, safety, operations management that take there's a couple more heads there. And I think that's something that, TransTech, I think, does really well and is a differentiator versus some of those smaller ones. When you look into the local CDL training spaces, those names change a lot because there are a lot of schools that, don't run things by the book. And I think that's one of our competitive advantages is that we're able to say, hey, we're providing a certified, audited, DMV compliant. We've got a great relationship with the DMV. Training regimen. A lot of schools kind of cut corners, and I think that's why employers kind of shy away from them in some cases because they know if they're going to TransTech, they're getting all their hours. They're going through the ringer. They're going to have a really robust training program that you might not get at a smaller school.
Mm-hmm. Bob, what did you mean 7 recruiters? Recruiters are salespeople bringing in. Okay,
that's right. Salespeople. Okay. Yeah, so
not getting them placed, not like placement people at local businesses.
Right. Yeah. So I should probably distinguish from our conversation earlier around recruiting, but so these are our sales staff. So you talked about kind of pivoting the business or kind of a strategic change away from relying on corporate business, from the big carriers who, like you mentioned, are kind of cyclical. With what we saw with our recruiters was, hey, we've got so much inbound demand from people that are individuals looking to sign up, but there's a little bit of sales process there, doing discovery on what are they looking to accomplish? Like, do they have the money now? Are they looking to get it matched up with an employer? Are they looking to get their Class A versus Class B? When we started, we had 2 recruiters, and they were kind of fielding all of the inquiries across the entire state. And as you can imagine, hundreds, a couple thousand over the course of a year. And you can't really build that relationship in the same way that you could if you had a bigger sales team. And so what we've done is we said, okay, as we turn up the dial on marketing to talk to more people on the cash pay side, these individual students, we got to have more recruiters. We got to have more sales staff to have those conversations and actually sign them up. They are salespeople. They're commission based, but they're really selling an aspirational product here, and then they need to understand kind of the person's individual circumstances and coach them in making a big life decision. So, but that's who our recruiters are.
And I think anyone who's kind of enrolled in post-secondary vocational training, there's so many barriers to actually just showing up to school. I remember just trying to figure out where to pay my tuition was just a pain, And so I think that's what we call them recruiters, because there is a sales element, but there's also an element of removing these barriers. Other schools will call them admission staff too, of understanding, okay, well, how much do you have to put down towards it? Is there, how can we get you into school? How do, is it your schedule that prevents you from coming in? How do we set up a plan for you to get here and get your CDL? And so I think that's an added benefit rather than just, a used car salesman slapping the top of a roof. It's someone who's there to help you kind of navigate your way to get to training.
Mm-hmm. Reminds me in SaaS world, the concept of customer success, it was always called customer service, but then this notion of customer success came along, which was like customer service plus, where you're really gonna help your customer be successful with the tool, and kind of really hold their hand and guide them into it. It sounds like kind of a similar thing for your recruiters. On this point about this being a big decision, this is also a big investment. It's thousands. Can you share what your list price is for your various options?
Yeah, so we are $4,500 for a Class A, and we're $3,500 for a Class B.
$3,500 and $4,500. So we'll average those. Call it $4,000 for people at the socioeconomic end of the spectrum that are not MBAs, let's just say, and indeed, like you guys said, this is aspirational for many folks. I mean, they're looking at this precisely because they don't feel like they're earning very much money. They're not earning very much money, and they want to earn more. $4,000 is a lot to anybody, but probably, or certainly more so for people at this end of the spectrum. and it's not a recurring business. So you couple non-recurring and, a big spend for people who don't have a lot of discretionary income. That's challenging. I'm just talking it's very clear why the recruiter, why you've gone from 2 to 7 recruiters, let's say. No, but how do you deal with that challenge? That's probably, not probably, I know from our pre-call, that's kind of one of the key, maybe not weaknesses, but challenges in the business. So how are you guys thinking through that?
Yeah, there is some federal support, and so that is a help for folks that can't meet it. But albeit, I think it's the biggest missed opportunity in legislation in the United States right now. By that I mean the payback period is so quick when you think about state funding for 4-year degree programs and kind of what the income yield and like tax yield is. Bob and I have done the math for the state of North Carolina. It's like a 1.6 year payback, which is certainly not the case when it comes to post-secondary education. So that component, we love to kind of drive more for that on our side. Opening up financing options is something that we've been working through too. It's a tough end of the market to service. Default rates are higher, so companies want to charge higher interest rates. So our careful decision making is how do we come up with a package or some options that students aren't being induced into some predatory lending environment. So we're really working to find a partner that can set that up. The third way is kind of playing matchmaker, like Bob said. There are companies that will pay for your tuition for you to come through school. Albeit it comes with a service requirement, either kind of 1 to 2 year service requirement. Typically, those jobs are over the road. So those admissions folks will walk through kind of those steps along with the cash pay. We like to say, hey, look, if you're doing this for your freedom, for your independence, the best thing you can do is put cash down because it means you don't have to navigate the myriad of qualifications for government funding. It doesn't mean you have to sign away 2 years to go over the road. If those are your only options, then go do them. But otherwise, pay cash.
But the 2-year over-the-road commitment thing sounds like a good deal in that you're also getting a guaranteed job.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that doesn't sound like a con. That sounds like a pro.
I think... I
guess it depends if you want to be an over-the-road. Maybe you're getting a CDL for a different type of job. If you don't want to be a long-haul trucker, then that's not appealing.
We try to coach our students on this. It is it's a pretty good option for your first role. I think it is harder to get hired as an inexperienced driver. There are insurance challenges if you're a small to medium sized company that might preclude them from hiring people with less than 6 months of experience. What we tell our students is that the first job out of school is not your forever job. You're not marrying the job here. What you're doing is you're getting paid while you're doing it. Between $60,000 and $70,000 typically. You're getting that really valuable experience. How to really, how to do your electronic logs, how to back up to a gate, what it's like actually working for one of these big companies, how to be places on time, that you can take those skills, get some of your tuition paid back because all the companies that we work with that we place students into offer tuition reimbursement. So they're paying you back, $200 a month towards the cost of your tuition. After 6 months, a year, when you feel like, hey, I'm tired of kind of being over the road and maybe being gone for an entire week at a time, or, I've got another option. What we found is that truck drivers are a kind of a flighty bunch, or I should say they're very opportunistic when new opportunities come along. So they're not afraid to jump to the next spot that they'll pay them a little bit better, give them a little bit better work-life balance, which, we tell students that's always an option. So I think that's what still makes it very attractive.
Circling back to kind of your thesis or what you observed in the market of CDL training was that highly fragmented, but that there were a couple of big players. So you saw that there was there was a couple of examples of there was the potential to get big because others had done that before you, if just a small handful. TransTech is already probably you'd call it a medium-sized player. Like it's much bigger. It's big in North Carolina. It's bigger than all the mom and pops. It's just not yet a national player. Did it grow through an acquisition or did it grow organically? How did it get to its unusual size?
Yeah, organically, and a lot of hard work. I think from the the team before us as well. In the sense, I think Charlotte's a great market. First of all, for truck drivers, it's this great intersection of kind of I-85, I-77, and the Atlanta to DC kind of route. So I think naturally that's a really good home base. Their second branch was up in the Hickory area, which was kind of the former furniture capital, still makes a ton of furniture, but they had a lot of displaced workers, I think, in the early 2000s. And, truck driving is a great alternative to that, coming out of manufacturing base. So that was kind of like the next location they opened. So for the most part, it's been organic, and then kind of added Asheville, added some of the community college partnerships as well, and so that kind of grew some of their branch and geography. I think in the past they had tried kind of South Carolina, but the benefit of staying in one state is you work with one regulator, one DMV. So I think that was why, towards the tail end of their career, our sellers had said, hey, like let's make this easy and just stick in North Carolina.
Is part of your eventual growth plan to expand to other states?
Yeah, I think we still have some white space in North Carolina first that we'd like to tackle. But certainly, I think the Southeast, like Bob mentioned, has a lot of regional kind of tailwinds to it. And so certainly South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, those would be great places for us to expand.
And what are the tailwinds for Southeast? Why? It's just because kind of the macro economy down here is just kind of surging?
Yeah, I think Bob touched on a lot of the reshoring of manufacturing. Like it's coming into South Carolina. They're building cars in South Carolina, battery plants, right. North Carolina. It's got a great population. I think it's attractive to those companies. These are genuinely non-union labor forces. So when they're relocating, they're coming down to this area. I think also, in the Southeast, there is kind of a view towards vocational training and truck driver training that's maybe a bit more familiar to other folks than other parts of the country. So I think it benefits from that as well. It's also, GDP wise, it's probably the fastest growing quadrant in the United States.
Great, guys. Well, we're wrapping up here, but there's still some questions I want to get to. But before we get off of TransTech, so it was $7 million top line, about $1.5 million EBITDA. That is a little bit smaller for a traditional search. When you're a partnered traditional search, does that mean you look even bigger? Would that be kind of the logic?
Typically. Yep.
Okay. So it's a small one on two fronts then. It's a smaller one than you were probably targeting. But you just answer, I assume, is you just liked it enough that you were willing to make an exception.
Yeah. I think looking at the growth trajectory, looking at kind of the macro thesis behind it, and all the things that you mentioned, and kind of the fragmentation side, what we saw was TransTech's a business that trains, in 2022, 2,000 drivers. It's the biggest player in the state of North Carolina. You look at the United States, there's something like 600,000 CDLs that are issued per year, with the largest CDL trainer in the country training about, depending on the year, between 15 and maybe 25,000 of those. So there's a lot of opportunity to go out there and consolidate either through, organic expansion. It's not that expensive for us to open a new branch, given kind of what we have in our back office staff to support that, or to acquire, to acquire some of those small, medium-sized ones. But the thing is, it gives us kind of that optionality to grow in both of those ways. Tyrel mentioned that it is nice to work with one state regulator, but all of the rules in terms of CDL training, they rhyme because it's kind of a federally regulated space.
And so you guys acquired in 2020 this year?
January.
When did you
2023? Yeah.
January this year. Okay. Well, here comes 1 year anniversary. And have you just quickly give us a picture on revenue growth, not growth, J curve? What are things looking like almost a year into this project?
I would say we saw a pullback in the corporate market, like as you described. It is a little bit more. It's not a great time for the corporate carriers, and that kind of manifests itself in less training support. On the individual side, we have kind of continued that growth path. I think by investing in more recruiting staff, investing in more marketing, we've kind of continued that trajectory. In addition, we've opened a new branch this year and moved our headquarters kind of from the Hickory market, which is about an hour north of Charlotte, to Gastonia, which is about 30 minutes to the west of Charlotte, kind of in a new manufacturing, warehousing space. There's a couple million square feet of logistics space right around our building. So, I think that presents itself really well for a really strong 2024.
Well, it's one of these where, if you guys can soldier through this really inhospitable trucking market, it's kind of a bit of a stress test for year one in the business, I would imagine. But as I said ahead of our call today, I was doing some Googling and people are talking about the trucking industry as not being in a good place now. And of course, even the layperson probably saw Yellow, which is one of the big names in trucking, completely shutter, I don't know, this summer. which was, I don't know how many thousands of truckers, but so you are feeling it, but it's not catastrophic.
That's right. Yeah. And like you said, if we can survive this, which we will, we can survive anything. But it also, it forces you to pull forward plans on growing the business that, to say, oh, well, on the first year we can kind of rest on our laurels and clip our coupon and make plans for next year. It's like, no, this year we got to grow. We got to, we got to invest in the team. We got to rethink things. We got to shift away from being too dependent on the cyclical parts of the business and invest in these parts of the business that have this huge TAM that hasn't been touched yet.
Great. Well, it's also is probably uncomfortable and maybe even scary at times as it is. It's like, these times of weaknesses in industries are also times where if you have the resources and the stomach, you can really pull ahead because you can kind of start gobbling up market share where weaker players are getting out, shuttering, whatever, having a harder time. Guys, I want to ask you so I want to zoom out now as we close just to three, still got 3 topics to go here, and are all kind of higher level topics. The first is just the trucking industry, not what I've already been beating on here for so long, but the trucking businesses like routes. So you see these FedEx routes, Amazon routes, you see other, I guess, long haul style trucking businesses on Biz Buy Sell a lot. It seems like these businesses really transact a lot, and that there are a lot of them. And you talked about at the top how you looked at some of those, didn't like them. Give us just 90 seconds on should searchers pretty much stay away from those businesses, what to look for, if or not, but what to look for.
Yeah, I think it's tough because we're like, wow, these businesses are 0 of 3 magic qualities. They're high capex, they're cyclical, they're non-recurring revenue in most cases. So our investors go, whoa, stay away. But that's not to say you can't carve out a niche. Like I think at one point we looked at milk delivery or milk haulers, basically the tanker trucks that go and pick up milk from farms. We talked to the biggest transporter in a certain state I can't mention, but that's great business because that's recurring. He didn't have churn in his drivers, so to speak, milk funds. But there are niches that I think are really good in that market. I think Stericycle obviously gobbled that up in the medical disposal field as well. So that's not to say they all can't be. I think dry van, spot market companies, absolutely stay away, stay a mile away. Pitfalls there, I think, is the asset base. It's really hard to tell, the quality of the assets that are underlying it. You can hire, staff to go out there, but also remember that these are bouncing around the country all the time. There's not a yard where they're all sitting at one point where you have one person go check them out. You can do the VIN numbers and stuff like that, but past, I want to say the warranty piece of the trucks, it's totally dependent on the maintenance program that the company is running. So there's a lot of risk in those businesses, and I think we were smart to stay far away from them.
Great. Thanks for that, Tyrel. That was perfect. And then the other big question I wanted to ask you is, so we talked about what you say, the sustained and probably growing demand for CDLs, because, the need for everybody to go get a 4-year traditional college degree kind of receding, the shortage of the shortage of truckers causing prices to go up, and a cultural shift that these are jobs that are going to be appealing to people who might have otherwise, gone and gotten a 4-year. But you guys landed on CDL training, but there's all kinds of other trade schools plumbing trade schools and HVAC trade schools. I mean, just go through the trades, and those trades don't have the cyclicality of trucking or some of the other things that the industries that you're really kind of pretty attached to do. So why did you look at other trade education in industries that have flatter and less cyclical, sales patterns?
We did. And I think what we saw there, like you said, they if you found a private school that did, plumbing training and things like that, yeah, I think it'd be a great investment, all things considered. What's different about plumbing, HVAC, the line or linesmen, things like that. These are trades that in some cases are done a lot of the times by the employers. It's kind of an apprenticeship model. you don't have, say, the same volume, I think, that you do with truck drivers. The challenge also is that you're competing with the community college system in a lot of cases. We do compete with the community college system a little bit. Our program, I think, is more tailored to kind of the students' actual goals and desires of 4-week courses and things like that. Most community college systems set up their CDL training to be 12 weeks, 18 weeks to comply with kind of federal requirements in order, without getting into all of it. That's how they get their money, is by having a longer program. Plumbing, it has to be a longer program. Electrician training has to be a longer program. Auto mechanics, things like that, these are longer programs. And so the community college system can run at a loss. State legislators are happy to keep funneling money into the community college system, despite the fact that they might not have the best customer experience. I think, and I think that's a lot of the reason why truck driver training has also moved kind of towards the private model. But I think that's what we saw in some of these other trades was heavy community college influence, and also kind of employers that have taken on a lot of the training in-house, and maybe just train 1 to 2 guys and make a 1 to 2 year training investment in them.
Mm-hmm.
Still great business, though. I'd encourage searchers to go look at the vocational training space as well. It's all those macro trends, but we certainly love CDL for the reasons Bob mentioned. Great.
Thank you for that, guys. Tyrel, you mentioned at the top that you're Canadian. Talk to my Canadian listeners. What should they know about being a Canadian searcher, buyer, operator of businesses? I kind of don't even know what to ask, so maybe you can fill in the blanks for me.
Well, it's a lot harder to win over owners in the Southeast, talking hockey. That's for sure. You gotta pick up some football lingo. So luckily, Bob carried me through those discussions as well. But part of the traditional route is it is a great path for a visa to the MBA system is really good at that. The extension visas you're able to get to go work while you search is helpful. So I didn't have any problem. I also married an American during the process for a lot of other great reasons. But one advantage to that is work visa as well. Canada's got a good reputation of being a friendly neighbor. So it wasn't a hindrance in any way, I don't think, unless Bob and the sellers were laughing behind my back about my accent sometimes that'll come out and hear an A or an about or something. But
yeah, probably would have a lot of Canadian searchers that have reached out to me are curious to know is about searching in Canada, which you didn't do, or the legalities of if they want to search in the States but are currently in Canada. And your answer to them was, in your case, you just had kind of this visa path ahead of you because you were already in school, and then you could do the extension visa. So if they're not plugged into an MBA program or business school students right now, they don't. I mean, your experience isn't going to apply.
I would
anything
mention
to add to that.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I would add the advice, look, the U.S. immigration system is extremely complex. It's a very hard thing to read about online. I would recommend, if you're look at deals in the United States, add to your diligence item list, the immigration pathway, and hire an advisor the same way you would, a QV provider to give you a kind of a quick look, a quick take to develop a visa path. Because certainly there are Canadians that have searched out of Canada and acquired a U.S. business, and there are certain visa pathways available to you based on your own, situation. And then, conversely, I think there's also a ton of opportunity in Canada. I think Canada's undersearched. And I hate to say this to an American audience, but I think there's a lot of Canadians that don't want to sell to Americans, and they kind of want to keep that homegrown feel. So I think there's an advantage for Canadians searching in Canada that maybe doesn't reverse the same way, cross border.
Yeah, fascinating. Great. Anything that we didn't touch on, guys, that you wanted to make sure we talked about?
Every guest says this. I would thank you as well for kind of building the community of search. And I think it's something Bob and it's a career path we're committed to for the long term, because we really believe in the space. This is what capitalism's good at, is how do you take something valuable and you preserve that value over generations. And I think I encourage everybody that's, kind of fearful, looking over the edge of the cliff going, hey, is this right for me? I think get into it and you'll figure it out, and you'll have some maybe fetal position moments, but certainly consider partnership. And certainly diligence your partner a little bit. It's worth it. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Bob, and I hope he would say the same.
I would.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think the people that are listening to this show, obviously, they're already drinking a little bit of the Kool-Aid. But I think it really is. It is worth the grind to find a great business. It's worth the effort to find a great partner. And then the effort that you put into the business, all these things that you think can be true. If you just kind of push on that door and through that uncertainty, you can. It's worth it.
Good. Great, guys. Well, I love your business, if it weren't already clear. Tyrel, can people reach out to you for your spreadsheet?
Yeah, absolutely. Hit me up on LinkedIn as well. That's probably the easiest way to find me. Happy to share that. I'll probably redact some stuff about my personal life, but yeah, I'll certainly give you the template.
I want to see all the scores you gave Bob.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, and Bob, is LinkedIn, well, how do you prefer people get in touch with you if they have a question?
Yeah, LinkedIn is best. Yeah, it's Boniface,
Boniface, great.
And if there's any searchers, that it doesn't work out, come get your CDL with TransTech as well. That's always an option for you. So trans-tech.net is a great place to come to.
Always selling, man. The American, you've become Americanized, Tyrel. Always Absolutely. Be selling. There you go. Always be closing. Sorry.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Tyrel, Bob, thank you for the time. What a great interview.
Awesome.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Will.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come, stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.